Warning. You've reached On the Box with Ray Comfort and are now in a biblical truth zone. Place all questions about theology, current events, and evangelism on the box, where they'll be weighed against the truth of God's Word. Ready your hearts and minds. You're about to be inspired and equipped to fulfill the Great Commission. Programming to engage in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Well, friends, if you're thinking to yourself that applause was more distinct than any applause you've ever heard on the Box with Ray Comfort, you'd be right, because it's coming from the hands of experienced volleyball players. I mean, hands that are used to doing this. So there you have it. Now, my question to you, friends, and this is a room full of young ladies that are part of this volleyball team.
There's some guys there.
Oh, and some guys, too. My question to you, ladies, is what would it cost me for you to spike balls at Mark Spence during the whole program? That's what I would love to see.
I don't like that idea. Pass
I
that
love
crush. It's not part of my vocabulary.
That would be wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, what a blessing to have you all with us. And actually, this may be interesting to you, but years ago, we had a well-known gentleman who was a part of the U.S. Olympic team in 2012 who was a part of our church, Reed Pretty. Sound familiar? Yeah, so we're cool. That's what that
His
means.
name was really Reed Pretty?
Yeah, he was a pretty guy, was he? Kind of. That was bad.
I'm
Sorry,
sure
Reed.
he's got that a lot.
All right, friends. Great to have you with us for another exciting edition of On the Box with Ray Comfort.
You've set the bar too high. It's going to be
Terrible,
boring.
really
boring,
Yeah, it's just,
pathetic.
I can't
Right,
stand
you'll
it.
fall
There you go.
asleep. Today we're going to be dealing with issues regarding sharing the gospel with children. And we have two separate questions that come to us, and we're going to fuse them into one. This one is from Natasha, and then the second one will be from Karen. Natasha says, how would you witness to children who are 3 to 5 years old using the law and the gospel? And then Karen kind of picks it up where she left off. My question is concerning little children who come to us at the mall. Can we witness to a little child, or is there an age we should not go below? Do we present the 10 Commandments and just tailor them to little children? For some reason, when I present the 10 Commandments to little children, they always reply no to all the questions. And I hope she's not asking about adultery. And I feel so bad trying to get them to say yes to any sin. What if the parents are standing there? So, Ray, I mean, this is a good question.
It's about 10 questions in one.
That's true. So we'll try to decipher through them. But I think the big picture is, look, we're always encouraging people to preach the gospel, and Scripture says to preach the gospel to every creature, obviously. And so I think that where they're getting at is they're faced with the opportunity to share the gospel with a child, and yet you've got the parents there, and there's the awkwardness of, well, what commandments do you take a child through? So I think it's kind of a multifaceted question. But what do you think of the big picture? How do you deal with witnessing to kids?
We should be able to witness, because I used to be one myself.
No.
Yeah, many
With a
years
beard?
ago. Yeah, no, I didn't have a beard. But, I used to, years ago, down in New Zealand, have a good time club. And I would go to local schools, stand outside local schools with Charlie, my dummy,
Right.
and ventriloquist, and say, come to the Good Time Club. We've got candy, we've got music, and a lot of fun, and kids would show up. I get 50 kids in my garage. I had them for a year, and then I go around different schools. I had 3 different schools I went to, and I have kids come to the club after school. Sometimes I have 100 kids in each club, and I would go through the commandments. I teach them Bible verses. I teach them music. He that believes has everlasting life and stuff.
Right.
Couldn't sing,
And I mean, you'd pack out your garage with kids.
Packed the garage with kids. We made the world's biggest chocolate cake at the end of the year.
Wow.
I had it sponsored by a bakery. It wasn't the world's biggest. It was only about 3 foot long. I actually made it for myself. I kept it. No, I didn't. The kids just loved
Ulterior
it.
motives,
We brought it
Mr.
in
Comfort.
front of about 300 kids. We bust them in. I brought it in like the ark was brought in on poles and everything, and the kids just loved it. But things have changed.
That's what I was going to
now.
say. Boy, have times changed.
This is like 30 years ago in New Zealand, which is a far safer and different country. Things have changed even down in New Zealand, where if you get kids into your garage,
Right.
what sort of pedophile are you? And you're going to end up in prison. You can't pat a kid on the head nowadays without being
So
looked
true.
on.
So true.
And it's tragic, because I feel for this person, I feel as you've got adding to that you're trying to scare kids about hell and stuff like that. But you can do it, but you've got to be very cautious nowadays.
Yeah, so true. Mark, you're really a kid at mind, I mean at heart. How would you
What does that mean?
answer this question?
Well, like Ray said there's multiple questions there. And one of them that I noticed right off the top is, how would I approach a 3 to 5 year old? I typically don't approach 3 to 5-year-old children out on the street. And if they're out on the street by themselves, I'm approaching them to lead them to a police officer. Why is a 3-year-old wandering the street? And what I do when a 3-year-old approaches me, why is a 3-year-old approaching me out on the street? It's not going to happen.
Right.
So, but here's the thing. If I'm in a situation and I'm around 3 to 5-year-old kids, what do? Well, the same thing I do with my kids. Typically, if I'm in that position, it's because I'm around you and your kids, or you're around my kids.
Right.
You know, you teach the kids in the rising up and in the sitting down. You're going to disciple my kids the way you disciple your kids. We are like-minded when it comes to that. So everything is a teachable moment. You know, every time they see a billboard, every time they hear somebody say something. I had shared that I was at Wendy's not too long ago, and there was a debate team all dressed up in a collegiate age. And one of them had blasphemed really loud, part of this debate team. My little girl, Ella, 6 years old, she said, "Dad, did you hear that? Somebody blasphemed. It's time for you to go share with them." I said, "Honey, eat your Frosty and fries." I mean, I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to approach them. I didn't want to get out of my comfort zone. Here I am having a nice meal at a very fancy restaurant with my little girl, and she wants me to go share with them. Well, she had prevailed upon me, and I made my way over there, and I pulled out a bunch of tracts, and I said, "Hey, listen, my little girl wants you to have one of these." And I pulled out $1 million bill, and I gave one to everybody that was there. I then went on to ask, who is the most prominent debater here? And they all pointed to a girl named Dakota. I said, "Hey, I got a good idea. How about we have a little mock trial here? You're part of a debate team, and you guys be the jury, and you be the defense attorney. I'll be the prosecuting attorney. You guys decide who wins the case." They were all up and for it. But here's the thing. I'm discipling my little girl. She's 6 years old. She's heard the gospel over and over again, and she sees me sharing the gospel with other people. That's really how I share with people who claim the name of Christ or are under the authority of those who have Christian parents. Now, those who don't have Christian parents, I typically don't have a lot of interaction because I mean, for what Ray said, I mean, we live in a different age than we did before. But if I was going to, I'd share perhaps the commandment honoring your parents. You know, you disobey that one, it's the same as sorcery, according to the OT.
Yeah, and you know, we have to be tactful. We have to be, you know, wise as serpents, gentle as doves, and understand, again, the context of the day and age in the midst of which we live. And so, look, you have to trust in the power of God to save. His hand is not short that it cannot, it's not short that it cannot save. And so, you know, you have to know that God is able. But besides the children that you don't know, we all have a lot of children in our lives that we do know and to whose lives we do have access. We have nieces and nephews. You know, we have little brothers or sisters, you know, cousins, whatever. Friends that have children that trust us to speak into their lives. So we have opportunities to do that, and we have to recognize that we have to make the most of those opportunities.
Also, I would be very cautious if I was asked to speak to 100 kids and share the gospel with them, maybe in a secular school or something like that, and permission from the headmaster. I'd be very careful about getting decisions from kids. It's a temptation that so many have. They can come away. I can get 98 decisions from 100 kids, I'm sure, in less than 3 minutes. All you do with 100 kids is say, "Hey kids, how to live forever?" You say, "Oh, that's right, Tommy, you give your heart to Jesus." Who wants to live forever? Why, all of you? How interesting. Who wants to give their hearts to Jesus? Except for Tommy in the back who's not listening.
Right.
And you've got your 98 decisions. And what's going to happen? They will love hearing about Noah and the ark until they become sexually aware and realize that girls and guys are more interesting than animals coming in 2 by 2. Right. So you don't want to get false converts, and that's what you get from kids you get decisions from. So if I was speaking to a group of young kids like that, you know, 10, 11 years old, I would take them through the commandments and be very careful. I would even talk about the lust thing, actually, at that age because of what's happening in today's society. Right. So many of them are coming under sexually explicit stuff at a very early age. So, but for someone who's 5 or 6, that age, I'd leave that one out. Talk about dishonoring parents, lying, being deceitful, being selfish, not loving the God that gave you life, using God's name as a bad word. You can do it. Yeah. And the way to see how we can do it is look at our, is it Hey Kids?
Yep.
Track?
Yep. Hey Kids, Albert Brainstein.
Albert Brainstein, that's Albert Einstein's little boy.
Yep, there he is.
Where? Oh, there he is. He's back. Yeah,
absolutely. And, you know, we've had people write to the ministry and give us testimonies of their young children coming to Christ because they were schooled by the law. these were parents that were holding up the standard of God before their children at home every day. And so being that they were under that, they came to a point like Rachel did, your daughter, my wife, where she recognized, Dad, I can't stop being horrible to the boys, her two brothers, one younger, one older. And she was brought under conviction that she wasn't loving her brothers. And that led her to repentance and faith because she recognized that Christ was her only hope.
Yeah.
And so you have to be careful of that. Paul Tripp, in his book, Shepherding a Child's Heart, which is one of the best books of all time,
Is that
in my
Paul
opinion.
or Ted?
No, that's Ted Tripp. Sorry, I'm getting confused with his brother, Paul Tripp. He's also an author who writes about raising children.
Tripped.
I tripped on Paul.
Never mind.
So, yeah, Paul Tripp, probably one of the best books I've ever read
Ted
on
Tripp.
any. Did I say Paul Tripp again? What a trip, you know?
What would you do without me?
Right. So Ted Tripp's book, Shepherding a Child's Heart, probably one of the best books I've read out of any category of all time. I mean, the pages of that book are stained with my tears.
It must be because you read the book but not the author.
Right. So anyhow, and one of the interesting points he makes is this. We have to be so careful with making it our primary goal to get our children to come to Christ.
Right.
And when I first read that, I thought, what are you talking about? But then he qualifies it. He says, obviously we want our children to be saved, but when we try to rush a decision like you talked about, then we circumvent the process that God uses to do that. And that's shepherding their hearts, and that's holding up God's standard so that they come under conviction and get saved. Anyone can manipulate a child, especially a parent with their own children.
Yeah.
And then you inoculate them, and they have this false sense of, hey, well, I said the prayer when I was a kid with my parents.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and another note, when you're witnessing to adults who have children, remember the children are listening too. So that's also something you can do. As you're sharing with the parents, you can gear your words in such a way where it applies to the kids too, in a sense, and they can understand.
And also, like we've got a book called How to Bring Your Children to Christ and Keep Them There. I bring out an illustration you can use with an egg. Remember that illustration? And it's one that, what's that one over there? You take your kids to the refrigerator, open it up, take an egg out, and drop the egg on the floor in front of the kid. You say, I can't do that. Yes, you can. You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. And if you can't drop an egg, just place it in the air and let gravity do the rest.
Right.
The egg hits the floor, and you say, what happened, kid? The kid says the egg hit the floor. I say, why? Because an invisible gravity took it there and splattered it. And if you violate the law of gravity, as it's often called, jump out of a plane without a parachute, you're going to end up like that egg on the floor. And that's just a natural law that God has given, and we're all subject to that natural law.
Absolutely.
But God has harsher laws, and one's called the law of sin and death, and it says the soul that sins, it shall die.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, fear not him who has power to kill your body, and afterwards can do no more, but fear him who has power to kill your body, and cast your soul into hell. Fear him. So just as you'd fear jumping out of a plane and suffering consequences of breaking the law of gravity, so we should teach kids that sinning against God and lying and stealing and dishonoring parents and lusting have terrible consequences. That knowledge will bring them to the foot of the cross.
Yeah.
Just like the knowledge of gravity will bring you to a parachute, the knowledge of God's law brings us to the cross where we begin saved.
Amen. Well said, Ray. Okay, we want to now cut to a video that actually gives a good example of how you can meet children on their level. Now, oftentimes you'll see adults trying to relate to kids, and they're preaching to them like they're preaching to a congregation of elderly people.
You've got to squat verbally.
Right. You've got to take it down to a level where they can understand it and begin to impact their hearts. So this is actually a video of Pastor Greg Laurie sharing with his grandchildren. So if it's queued up, let's roll it.
Who wants to hear a Bible story? What?
I love Papa's stories.
Today I'm going to tell you the story of Jonah and the whale.
Yay!
Once upon a time, there was a man named Geppetto. And
That sounds a little fishy to me. Why does Papa always tell it wrong?
oh, there was a man named Jonah. And God said, Jonah, I want you to go to the city of Nineveh, and I want you to preach to them and tell them they've been bad and they've sinned, and I want them to turn back to me. And you know what Jonah did?
Haven't got a clue.
He said, no, I'm not going. And he went in the opposite direction. He was supposed to get in a boat and go to Nineveh, and instead he got in another boat and went to another place.
Uh-oh. He shouldn't have done that.
And this big storm came. Huge storm. Everybody's going, we're going to die. We're going to die. Everybody pray. Pray to God. But Jonah wasn't praying. Guess what he was doing?
What?
He was asleep. He's asleep. He's in the lower part of the boat asleep. And they wake him up and said, call on your God. Call on your God. Maybe you'll have the right God, because clearly we don't have the right God because the storm's still here.
He better wake up. Wake up.
It was because of Jonah the storm came. They said, what's your problem? Jonah said, I don't know, I've been bad. But if you throw me overboard, the storm will stop. And guess what they did?
They threw him overboard.
And Jonah thought that was the end. But guess what happened? You know what happened.
Oh, a big whale came and swallowed Jonah up.
A big whale came and swallowed Jonah up, and he's inside of the whale, and there is Pinocchio. And Jonah said,
Wrong story, Papa.
okay, Pinocchio wasn't there. Anyway, this whale, whose name was Monstro, swallows Jonah.
No! He must like Pinocchio. Okay, get back to Jonah, Papa.
So he's swallowed by the whale, and he's inside. And guess what he says? I'm not going to do what God says. He's wrapped in seaweed. Have you ever been wrapped in seaweed?
No!
And fish were in his face, and they were smacking him like this. This is the fish. Trying to catch a fish. Trying to catch a fish. Trying to catch a fish. This is what was happening to Jonah. This is what was happening. Fish were doing this, and seaweed was wrapped around him like this. Like this.
Wow, he is dramatic. Papa sure is funny.
He stayed there for 3 days and three nights. And then finally Jonah said, all right, God, I'm sorry.
And he prayed for 3 days.
He did? What did he pray?
Please, God, let me out of the whale.
Yeah, and guess what the whale did?
He got sick. He grew chunks.
Threw him up.
That's disgusting. Ew.
So he came rolling out of the whale's mouth. The whale, look. Sit down. I'm going to pretend I'm Jonah. Sit down.
He gets so animated.
I'm Jonah. I just got barfed out of a whale. People of Nineveh, turn back to God. You know what I smell like?
Baby Christopher's diaper. Ew.
I smell like barf. Guess what happened? The people of Nineveh turned back to God. God said, I'm going to forgive them of their sin. And they all believed in God, and the Lord forgave them of their sin.
I'm happy they prayed. Yay!
That's the story of Jonah. So what could we learn from a story like that?
To always believe in God.
To always believe in God. How about this? If God tells you to do something, should we do it? What?
Do it!
Is it a good thing to run from God?
No!
Is it a good thing to do what God says?
Yes!
Let me ask you this. Did God love Jonah?
Yes!
Sometimes when you're bad, do you ever get in trouble?
Yeah.
Is that because your mom and dad don't love you or because they do love you?
Because they do love you.
That's right. And so God loved Jonah, and because he was being bad, the Lord kind of spanked him inside of a whale's stomach.
It's better to listen the first time. When God talks, I'm gonna listen.
So here's the deal. When God tells you to do something, do it.
And they lived happily ever after. The end.
Well, I learned a lot from that.
Oh.
Surfing background, stay away from whales.
Right.
Just stay away from those big mouths.
But how heartwarming was that?
He
you
did
know?
such a good job.
And I mean, that's kind of, in a sense, what you were doing with the kids in your garage back in New Zealand.
Same sort of talk.
Right. Relating to them on a level they can understand. And so, friends, listen, like I said, it's not just our kids directly or maybe the kids of people that we don't know, but there are all sorts of different children in our lives that we can impact, especially children in our neighborhood. And that leads into this question. This is from Paul. Would it be possible for Mark to share a bit more on how he handles his house as a neighborhood hangout? We have 2 boys who like to come over and play hockey, and we were wondering, how and where do you draw the boundaries with neighborhood kids? Also, what are some good starters to discussing the gospel? We've given these boys tracts, but I'd like to share the gospel with them one-to-one. So, Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do to reach the kids in your neighborhood and answer some of these questions?
You know, real estate in Orange County is very expensive, as you know, and it's my desire, it has been ever since I got married, to have a really big backyard.
Right.
And that desire comes with the idea of having the neighborhood kids come over to my house instead of my kids going over to the neighborhood's houses as they get older and on into the teen years. So when we saw our house over in Riverside, where you can get more house for the buck and more yard for the buck, I really just took a look at the backyard, fell in love with it, and I said, hey, we'll take it, without ever giving a real thorough examine of the inside of the house. My wife has the same sort of vision. We have 5 kids. We homeschool all 5. Their ages differ. Yeah, they sure do. They differ, and they change every year. Right. And when we put together the backyard, we have a huge trampoline. We got a big playground. We got a sidewalk that goes around the back where the kids have their little RC cars, and they ride their bikes and their skateboards and everything else. It's my vision being fulfilled, because all of the kids, the neighborhood kids, want to come over to our house to hang out, to play. My wife's always baking. She's always doing something. And the kids, it's not unusual to have kids to have meals with us continually.
Makes me want to come over.
Yes. Right. In fact, one of the neighborhood kids not too long ago said, hey, I enjoy hanging out with you guys more than I enjoy hanging out with my own parents. Wow. You know, it's just a matter of being there for the kids. And since we are always teaching our kids, remember, everything is a teachable moment. The gospel is always coming out, and the questions are always coming forward. You know, the latest DVD that we produced, the EVG, Evolution vs. God, I was able to give it to my kids, and I said, hey, make sure you watch this with your parents. But it's also not unusual to come home and to see the parents hanging out inside of my garage without ever knocking on the door saying that, hey, we're here. Right. I've gone into my backyard, and I just see them hanging out over by the playground, sitting on a bench or something, sitting on a chair, or underneath a tree or something, and I'm just going, wow, look at these. Where all the neighborhoods, not just the kids, but the parents alike, feel the comfortability and the warmth to be able to come over to the house and to be able to sit there and to have fun with the family. So the vision is being fulfilled, and that's our desire. We want to be able to reach out to the kids, and our kids have no desire to go to the neighborhood houses because we have all the good things. Right. And it's not the fact that we're spoiling them, but we are there for them and pouring into them. And the trampoline just happens to be a byproduct, and the same thing with the playground, which were both given to me. So I appreciate that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So, Mark, in terms of boundaries then, in relation to the question here, is there ever a concern in regards to maybe influences on your children? Maybe some of the neighborhood kids that don't know the Lord, obviously bringing over certain language or certain behaviors that might influence your kids, or maybe you know, the kids going back to their house and saying, hey, Mr. Spence said this or that if you're sharing the gospel. How do you deal with all that?
Yeah, well, kind of 2 parts there. I'm never alone with the kids. I'm always outside. They can always look over the wall, and they do. There's 12 houses that look into my backyard because I'm the very corner of a cul-de-sac, so everybody's staring at me. That is a little bit difficult when I'm back there, but the kids are always there, and I'm always sharing the gospel when my kids or my wife is around. Typically, it's in the backyard. Now, what happens if they go home to their parents and say, hey, Mr. Spence said this? I've got no problem with that, and I have no problem bringing the clarification. My life is an open book. Live your life in such a way that you can sell your parrot to the town gossip and not feel threatened. I mean, that's the way I want to live my life, and that's really basically what I do. Now, when it comes to the kids learning new words, yeah, our next-door neighbor taught our kids the F word. So my boy comes in and he says, hey, Dad, what does so-and-so mean? And I go, where did you hear that, son? He's like, oh, next door. So-and-so taught it to me. And I go, oh, so what does it mean? What is this a bad? And then he just keeps repeating it over and over again, and he knows he's getting underneath my skin, and it was working, so I slapped him. No, I didn't. I didn't do that. But, you know, it's a teachable moment, once again. I'm not offended because I hear that word continually. I'm just not used to hearing my kids share that word. So then when I went out to share with her, and I said, so I heard you're teaching my kids some new words. It was right then that mom came over, her mom came over, and she said, what's going on? I said, oh, well, just talking to your daughter that she had taught my kids a new word. Inevitably, my kids were going to learn it sooner or later. I just didn't want them to learn when they were 6. And the little girl went running away. She was so terrified. She was so afraid. And you notice the difference that my kids don't go running away from me terrified that when they do something wrong, because they realize that we can work through things. Big difference, and the kids and the parents alike, they're noticing it as well.
Yeah, and that goes back, Ray, to having the type of relationship with your children where they will come to you and not be afraid to say, hey, someone said this, what's this mean? Or I saw this or that. You know, the importance of that openness. Yeah,
absolutely. It reminds me of the time when I was talking to some non-Christians just after I preached the gospel, and my daughter, Rachel, your wife, as we know, was about 10 years old, and she said, Dad, when I was talking to other people, I was sharing the gospel, and she knows she's not to say anything, so I patted her on her head. I said, just settle down. And she said, Dad, Dad. And so I thought, what's going on? I'm witnessing. And I patted her head again, and I realized what the problem was. A seagull had hit a missile right on the top of her head, and I was patting it, and it was all hot with the sun and that, and I was getting in my hands. But when kids have got something on their mind, you want them to come and talk to you about it. And she had something on her mind that I washed off.
That's funny.
Oh, boy. Rachel will love it that you shared that story. But, yeah, you know, having that openness with your children and being able to dialogue with them, that's one of our favorite things at home. You know, in fact, there are times where, especially with my older daughters now, Summer and Julia are almost 15 and 16.
Yeah,
and
get
you know, they just
married soon.
Right, yeah. And there's times where I just step back and I think, man, you know, they love talking to us, but there are times where they especially want to talk to Mom, you know, about lady things or whatever. So there's times I'm like, you know, I used to have a wife once. And it's like they'll go for hours in the evening. And I love
wonderful.
it. It is. It's a
Yes.
wonderful thing. And that I'm so blessed that our children can have that openness with us and, and you know, can dialogue in that way. And so, friends, it's extremely important to do that. And we have one more question here. It says, they say who you choose to hang around is who you'll become. How can you help guide your children toward choosing the right friends? What do you think, Ray?
Well, my kids are growing up, so it doesn't matter.
You don't remember, Ray? Was it that long ago?
I have no idea.
No
They look
idea.
completely different. They're little kids now, they're humans.
Right.
So pass over to Mark Spence.
Mark, how do you help your children to choose the right friends?
Well, we typically only, besides our neighborhood kids that are within elbow distance and reach of us, you know, we're very selective. I mean, if you want to be friendly, you first have to, if you want to have friends, you first must be friendly. But bad company corrupts good character. So we have to be very careful on who we hang out with and how we go about doing those things. So we hang out with a lot of church families and things of the like. That's typically what happens. We have kids that stay the night that we want to pour into, you know, so you just got to be careful. Same way that we would pick our friends, I do the same thing with my kids. So.
Yeah. Counsel your children. You know, sit down with them and have family devotions and speak about certain topics.
Right.
Take them to the Proverbs and look at what the Proverbs say about friends and choosing your friends wisely and not associating with an angry person and, you know, so on and so forth. I mean, that guidance is so important, and children are so impressionable.
Yeah.
There are things that I heard when I was a child that to this day, I mean, I'm talking 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, I still hold on to and treasure because, you know, they hit me in a significant way. So,
Absolutely.
friends, we hope that's been helpful to you today. And remember, preach the gospel to every creature, use wisdom and tact, and be guided and directed by God's Spirit. Remember to check us out on Facebook and on Twitter and onthebox.us. Lord willing, we'll be back here with you again tomorrow. God bless.
For questions about On the Box with Ray Comfort, or to submit questions for future shows, please email onthebox@livingwaters.com. That's onthebox@livingwaters.com. On the Box with Ray Comfort is an outreach of Living Waters. For more resources to inspire and equip you to fulfill the Great Commission, check out livingwaters.com or call toll-free 1-800-437-1893. Now go and preach the gospel.